mentioned conquest. It is with pain to remind South Africans here and now that your grandparents held and conducted 10 bloody wars over a period of 100 years in the Eastern Cape. At the end of the day, 3 million hectares of land in the Eastern Cape is in white hands, and blacks only own 250,000. That's what you achieved. I will not talk about the rest of South Africa. So that conquest is a painful reminder of our past. Now you talk about the Einstein, theory, that doing the same thing over and over again, applying the same method, is not the wisest thing to approach when you're looking for change. Now, you are sending this country back to those kind of wars. Who in South Africa would think that AfriForum is a wise institution when you yourself are saying that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different set of results is not the best thing? So that's where you want to send South Africa to. I don't know how many people in South Africa are interested in those wars, which you are advocating for. Thirdly, you seem to be very comfortable to put blame on the current operational failures of the current government. Now, this operation, this process is not about evaluating the failure or success of the current government. Governments come and go, and it could be a totally different government in a couple of months' time, if not a couple of years. Lastly, Chair, I want to thank this gentleman, powered as he is by the minority AfriForum, for the attitude that he has displayed with those contents. You have hardened our attitude that maybe we don't even need a CODESA. We don't even need a court case. The Constitution has to be amended in a matter of months if we've got such people in the country. And then we can go back to war if need be. That's basically where you have sent me from now onwards. I know there is a member of parliament who said, should this happen, there will be civil war. Okay, the Constitution should be amended in a matter of months if we've got such people in this country. We're wasting time by talking. After all, there were no talks for 400 years ago. People were simply murdered. When I grew up, my father didn't own any land on which to produce food for us to eat. The nearest food-producing field was 10 kilometers away. And until he died, we had to walk in the morning to those fields, then chase 9 o'clock at school. At 2:30, we go back there. By the end of the day, we're finished because my father had no millet fields on which to. And you want that to be repeated. You have the guts to come to this legislature to tell us that you want that to be repeated. And my mother, who was a qualified teacher, had to drop out of school because of the policies of apartheid, because the policy wouldn't allow her to teach whilst my father was also a teacher, and there was no field for her, for our family to produce food. But here I am today as an MP. I will stand for them. Let's go for the amendment of the Constitution. This talk, Honorable Chair, is a waste of time with such characters in South Africa.
Except that the process of Parliament of soliciting and getting the public participating will continue. Yeah. I'll talk to you just one point. I'm coming to Honorable Shivambu. So the process of amendment will remain intact in terms of the Constitution. So it's Filtana's remarks, but not the committee's position. Honorable Shivambu, followed Honorable Mutapo. Aye?
Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay.
When this gentleman was from AfriForum was trying to present whatever he wanted to present to this committee, he was drunk on hatred of hating black people. Yeah. The insanity he defined, I could see on him. The insanity he defined on the alliance of, so-called alliance of ANC and EFF, I could see on him. And don't come here and misrepresent facts. As we are talking now, even before, there has never been food security. There has been a lot of food shortage long before, especially for us, for masses of our people. So now, because Parliament has taken a resolution, you come here and try to be smart, try to be as if you are sympathetic to our people and say that they will, if this happens, there will be shortage of food. That's sheer insanity, drunk on hatred.
Honourable
The
Shivambu.
issue,
Oh,
the
sorry.
issue of, I'm taking back the words, Chair. The issue of, in law we say there is a rest you lose, no man's land. The thing belongs to no one, like the birds when they fly here. They don't belong to anyone, they are rest you lose. So you want to tell us that in 1488, when Bartholomew Dias arrived here, it was no man's land. In 1652, when those guys, Jan van Riebeck, arrived here, it was no man's land. That's sheer insanity and drunkenness on hatred. So what I would like to know from you, although I don't think it's necessary, as Honorable Mampur has alluded to, our royalty, our great-grandfathers and mothers, our kings and queens were robbed of their land. They were given mirrors. Now you tell us you negotiated. How can you negotiate with a person whom you don't even, because they didn't even understand these languages? How did you negotiate with them? So please, if you want this process or your inputs to be taken seriously, don't come here with sheer arrogance. We have been listening to you, insulting us, lambasting on us, calling us names, but you want us to take you seriously. That's sheer insanity.
Shivambu.
No, thanks, Chairperson. I honestly think we should not be agitated by racist Afrikaner children who come here and try to have some chicken audacity to try to insult us and try to anger us. Because that is what they've been doing throughout the public hearings. They've been following us, a group of racist kids from Pretoria who have been following us in the Northern Cape, in KwaZulu-Natal, coming to make threats to us there, because they had hoped that we're going to react there and then collapse the public hearing process. That's what they've been doing. They're the ones who went to America to go and spread false propaganda that there's white genocide in South Africa. And trying to mobilize the international community against the democratic state. That is treasonous. We have got kids, racist kids, going around saying that there's genocide in South Africa, there must be sanctions, there must be all sorts of limitations that are imposed on South Africa. While we're a democratic country, we'll have to live with these realities that we have amongst us, kids who have been drained in racism. They've been taught racism. They suck racism from the breast of their mothers. That is why every time they think, every time they walk, everything else that they do, it's expression of anti-black racism that they are doing. The fact of the matter is that the white people in South Africa came as a form of colonial settlements. That is a fact. That the land that they are occupying is through colonial settlement. They are settlers here. They even refer to themselves as Europeans. They had boards all over South Africa saying, Europeans this side, blacks this side. It's not us who said that. Throughout their existence, they identified themselves as Europeans. And now when we want our land back, no, we're not Europeans, we're Africans. They do not want to hand back the land back to us. We are going to amend the constitution in order to expropriate land without compensation. And we're not going to be threatened by kids We're not going to be threatened by children who think that the imperialist powers will intervene. There's nothing that is going to happen about that. The only question that we're going to ask is, are you still threatening us with war like you have been sending those Afrikaner thuggish kids who came to threaten us in the public hearing? Are you still threatening war if we engage on a democratic process to change the constitution in order to expropriate land without compensation? If you're threatening us with war, we're ready. We're more than ready.
Honorable Kuranov.
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. I was reluctant to make a contribution today because I'm part of the white minority in South Africa. But everyone was making a statement and I was feeling it is important. For me, AfriForum acted today as a white, black land first organization. They're definitely not representing the white minority in South Africa. And what you did today was a disgrace for your own organization. And I'm telling you, you will feel that in future. The way you acted the previous months, the way you acted trying to fight for something you believe in, you will destroy yourself. Whether you like it or not, that will happen because South Africans are fair people and they judge, and when they judge harshly. But I do have a question. AfriForum was present basically at 95% of all the public hearings we had across the land. At every forum where I was, AfriForum spoke. Was there not a report back from those people who spoke to head office to report to you that South Africa, the majority of South Africans who attended those hearings, are hunger for land, and that is a problem that we all need to solve? And was there no report back to that? And if there was a report back, why don't you change your stance to be more progressive and trying to assist a problem we need to fix in this country?
Honorable Swart.
No, Chair, I also would like to add dat ek is teleurgesteld met julle submissie vandag. Ek is al 20 jaar in die parlement, where we've been building a new South Africa. We've been building relations. And I've heard other AfriForum meetings where you have presented. There's not been this arrogance. We are trying to build a South Africa. You are taking us back. En ek maak 'n bepleit met jou vandag dat your insults to the people here is unacceptable. We need to come together as a nation. Ek is Afrikaans sprekende. Vandag, 52 jaar gelede, is Hendrik Verwoerd doodgemaak in hierdie parlement. Jy weet dit, né? And we need to reach out to each other. You've heard people here that are hardening their hearts as a result of what you have said today. We've been sitting with this process for months to find a restorative justice solution. You have not commented on one clause of the Constitution. All you've done is you've attacked the ANC and the EFF. Why don't you comment on the provisions of the Constitution and be constructive so that we can take this process forward? It's exactly the same as Black Land First yesterday that attacked me as a white person. You've done the same to black people today. And so please, I would plead with you to reconsider your approach. We are called to be peacemakers. Blessed be the peacemakers. We are called, we have a ministry of reconciliation. And I'd urge you to consider your position. Thank you.
Honorable Bredenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that AfriForum, I'm not going to comment on what the other speakers have said or repeated. I think this is a missed opportunity for you. And I cannot align myself with anything that you have said.
Mr. Roots, well, with all decency and respect, your presentation was not part of the subject matter. And therefore, I couldn't stop you. You had the opportunity, and I allowed members to speak, even if it wasn't, they were not supposed to, because the session was for clarity seeking and all that. So I think I would like to close the session here, and thank you. Okay. What? Members, you will not have another chance to reply. Okay.
I don't want to be insulted again. Close him out.
Yeah.
Chair, allow
Yeah.
him.
No, members.
Allow him to hang himself.
Members. Wait. No. Mr. Roots. Okay. Honorable Telesi. Honorable Telesi.
Chair, I understand my colleagues and agree with them when they say he mustn't continue. But for one reason, and I hope honorable members would agree with me, South Africa and black people in South Africa, including the whites, they should know that we've got such in our midst, and he must actually come out very clear for the whole South Africa to know what problems we're having. Because he is saying black people don't need land for agriculture. That's what he says. He's saying black people don't need more land than what they've got. AfriForum is calling black people the so-called blacks. That's what South Africa must hear. Give him a chance, as much as it's an embarrassment. Let him continue to do so for record purposes and for people to know the true colors of AfriForum.
All right, Mr. Roots, right to reply. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Firstly, I did not come here thinking that I would convince certain members of this parliament, but I believe that what we can do with our presentation is to try to expose what the ANC and the EFF are doing.
Point of order, Chair.
I think,
Point of order,
members.
Point of order, Chair.
Mr.
You see
Chairperson,
now-
I'd
you
like
see
to
now,
respond
Make
to
sure
the
that
questions.
Trump is listening. Make sure Trump is listening.
Members, you see now.
Can I
It
respond
is
to
his
the-
right now. You have made your statements. I didn't stop you. He must now make his statement, and we still have presenters to make the point, to make their presentation. No. Continue, Mr. Roots.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Chairperson, there's a very big important difference between the term straw man and steel man. A straw man is when you try to attribute things to someone that that person has never said or that that person doesn't believe. When you make a steel man argument is when you try to portray what your opponent is saying as accurately as possible so that you can respond to the actual position of that person. What we've heard in the last 20 minutes are repeated straw man arguments, things that are being said that apparently AfriForum is saying that AfriForum is not saying. There was a list. It's not possible for me to respond to every single straw man argument or every single false accusation about what AfriForum is allegedly claiming. But I will try to respond to some of these things. We can talk. There were, and I've noted this in my presentation, that there were serious injustices in South Africa's history that we need to take cognizance of and we need to deal with them. So I don't have a lot of time. I'll respond first to the historic point and then I'll respond to the solution, because I think that's what we believe the solution is. I think that's the most important point. There were serious injustices and they need to be dealt with. But we need to deal with them on a factual basis. I can also tell stories of how my great-grandfather, Sarel Arnoldus Roots, wasn't able to fight against colonialism because he was 3 years old when he was thrown in a concentration camp. He escaped a concentration camp when he was 3 years old. But I do not believe that the emotion that I have regarding the fact that a little toddler boy, who if he had died in that concentration camp, I would not have been born, my emotions regarding that should not determine what my argument should be. The facts should determine what my argument should be. If we talk about, firstly, AfriForum did not say that the entire South Africa was empty land. We didn't say that. We said there were 3 ways in which land was acquired. If you disavow the notion that there was any empty land in South Africa, then you need to disavow a list of things. You need to disavow the fact that in 1884 the commission track went into South Africa and came back and reported that there was a lot of land where they couldn't find any people. You need to disavow the fact that in the diaries of voortrekker leaders and missionaries and many others, they wrote about how there were certain areas that were inhabited and where groups lived in certain areas and how there were certain areas that were not inhabited. You need to explain what the consequences was of the great Xhosa suicide of Nonkahuse, for example. You need to explain what the consequences of the Mfecane was, where 1 to 2 million people died as a result of expansionist wars. And if you want to surpass all of those, you still need to surpass the geological and biological fact that it isn't possible to survive on more than 30% of South Africa's surface if you do not have the technology to dig a borehole. That is a geological fact. You cannot claim.
Do the solutions, the time is lapsed. Just do your solutions.
Thank you. I would have liked to respond to the others, but let me go to the solutions and I'll deal with them quickly. There are 8 things that we believe should be done, and I will go through them quickly. In terms of what this... to the missus of the ANC, I did not interrupt you when you were speaking.
Yeah, so just
there were 8 things. There are 8 things that we believe should be done.
No.
I'm not calling you a strawman. I'm saying you are committing strawman arguments.
Mutapo.
There are 8 things.
Honorable Mutapo. Honorable Mutapo. Honorable
Mr.
Mutapo.
Chairperson.
Please.
I think the intolerance that we are seeing here to arguments that disagree with yours is exactly the type of intolerance
just give the
that we
solution,
are
answer
struggling
the
with.
question on solutions.
Firstly, the first
Mr.
thing that
Rhodes.
needs to be done is there should be a proper protection of property rights in South Africa. We cannot have economic growth or economic prosperity without the protection of property rights. Secondly, people should have the opportunity to work for themselves, to work themselves out of poverty, and not be given freebies out of poverty, because that isn't sustainable. Thirdly, restitution must happen. It is not our view that there should not be restitution. There has to be restitution. But it must be historically accurate, and it must be based on evidence. Next, we need to fix the education system, particularly for black schools in South Africa, because all the available evidence indicates to us that black schools are the most dysfunctional schools in South Africa, which has a major consequence on prospects of economic prosperity. The next point, economic and labor policy that is not founded on the pursuit of actual economic freedom. Economic freedom is the freedom to produce, not the freedom to receive stuff for free. Economic and labor policy that is founded on actual economic freedom must be fostered. Next, we must close unnecessary government departments that only serve to waste taxpayers' money. We need to seriously cut down on the Department of Land Reform, which will leave less room for corruption and theft of money by ANC cadres, so that the money can be used for what it needs to be used, which is restitution, which needs to happen. The next point is that title deeds must be given to millions of poor South Africans who live on state-owned land and who are complaining about the quality of that land. And lastly, Mr. Chairperson, we need to free our minds from this notion of equality of outcome and of cultural relativism. The idea that if a particular occupation doesn't comply with the racial breakdown of national demographics, then there could only have been some form of oppression. We need to stop prescribing to people how they should think. We need to stop being angry about the fact that 93% of people who file land claims say that they would rather want money than land. We need to stop being angry about the fact that black people are urbanizing at a higher rate than any other race group. We need to stop being angry about the fact that certain people tend to want to be farmers and certain people tend not to want to be farmers. Once we deal with these issues, Mr. Chair, I'm concluding, then we will be able to move forward. I note the lady from the ANC is clutching her ears because she doesn't want to listen to a solution that is not in line with what her party is saying.
No, it's all right, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
We want to thank you for coming and making your oral presentation on this process. Thank you very much. Where is the next presenter? Van Vuren.
What have I said? What have I said?
Mr. Van Vuren, are you here?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we are here.
All right. The we break a bit or what? All right, please circle members. Honorable Mpumlwana, you are taking the time for the next presenter. Our next presenter is Witzenberg Pals.
Yes.
Mr. Gerrit van Vuren.
Thanks,
Please.
Mr. Chair.
Chair.
My name is Raymond Koopstad. I'm the chairperson of the Witzenberg PELS. PELS is standing for Partners in Agri-Land Solutions, and I want to introduce my colleagues here. On the left side of me is Mr. Joseph Ndaba from Ietu Ntaba farm in Kobokofjeld, and on my right-hand side is Mr. Gerrit van Vuren, our legal advisor and our strategic advisor. As my introduction, Mr. Chair, and to the House is Section 25(4) says, refers to the nation's commitment to land reform. It follows that it is not only government's obligation to implement land reform. Instead, all sectors of South African society have an obligation to support, engage in, and commit themselves to successful land reform. Our presentation is done from a practical perspective of implementing land reform in Witzenberg and other areas of our country. We believe that society must partner with government in expediting successful land reform. Witzenberg PELS was established as a private land reform initiative by the agricultural producers and agricultural commercial farmers in the Witzenberg municipality and members of the local community in 2014. When we launched this initiative, we consulted with the national government and received the relevant ministers and DGs to introduce the initiative to them, and they advised us to proceed with the implementation of the initiative. Witzenberg PELS are involved in land reform in the context of transfer of land to black people, the assistance to new land owners to sustainably utilize such land for agri-production, and the creation of a generational dividend for the black owners. As stated on page 6 of our presentation, PELS have listed more than 100 projects and implemented projects that involves more than 30,000 hectares of high-value irrigated farmland. This was done partly with government funding and assistance. Government did undertake to assist with enablers, such as subdivision and water licenses for water rights and dams, but service delivery remains a huge challenge from government side. On page 7 of our presentation, we submit that the implementation of land reform involves the transfer of land into black ownership in a manner that would improve these new owners' livelihoods and eradicate poverty. We further agree with a motion adopted by the National Assembly on 27th of February 2018, namely that land reform should be implemented in a manner that increases agricultural production and improves food security. In order to achieve effective and sustainable land reform, it has to be implemented with transparent and agreed parameters, with clear identifiable and measurable goals, and with post-transfer support as an indispensable ingredient. Notwithstanding the provisions of the Constitution and the various initiatives by the government since 1994, land reform had not been implemented successfully in our country. This, of course, infringes upon the rights of all citizens, black and white, as they are hereby being deprived of their constitutional right to own land. The PELS initiative invested substantial human and intellectual capital in refining the PELS framework to avoid the mistakes of previous land reform models. We make our proposals with a collective commitment to the constitutional rights of all the people of South Africa as enshrined in the Bill of Rights. On pages 9 and 10, we deal with Section 25. In summary, we submit as follows. It is neither necessary nor advisable to amend Section 25 of the Constitution to implement sustainable land reform. Expropriation can be used as a tool to redress spatial inequality. This could be achieved by virtue of legislation that provides for expropriation for purposes of housing and other constitutional imperatives. As PELS members, we submit that constructive land reform, adopted as a joint enterprise by the public and private sector, has the ability to create unity within a more equal and harmonious country. It has the ability to present South Africa with a more humane, a just, a peaceful, prosperous, and democratic face to the world. The empowering nature of the Constitution with regard to land reform is eloquently described by Judge Albie Sachs as follows, and I quote, "Far from being a barrier to radical land distribution, the Constitution in fact requires and facilitates extensive and progressive programs of land reform. It provides for constitutional and judicial control to ensure equitable access and prevent abuse. Expropriation can be a tool to redress spatial inequality. It is advisable to use Parliament's legislative powers to draft new and amend current legislation which would empower government to expropriate land for purposes of housing and similar objectives in line with the Constitution. Such legislation can then be tested against Section 36 of the Constitution. It is submitted that for purposes of redistribution of agricultural land, expropriation should be a last resort, as there is overwhelming evidence that the private sector is willing and able to partner with government to voluntarily relinquish land and assist with the transfer of land to black people in processes that are alternatives to expropriation." I thank you. I hand over to Mr. Joseph Ndaba.
I thank you, Chair, for the opportunity I get. My name is Joseph Ndaba from Witzenberg, a Twin Tower project, where I'm owning 30% shares. On page 12 and 13 of our presentation, the National Development Plan discussed, we submit that in order to increase agricultural production and improve food security, the principle of the National Development Plan must be implemented effectively. Chapter 6 of National Development Plan provides the necessary principle and framework to expedite agricultural land reform and suggest a rural development strategy. The Partner in Agri-Land Solution framework as potential game changer for land reform is on page 14 and 15. The PELS framework is based in a sound legal and structure background to ensure sustainable black agricultural business. The requirements for successful land reform are all addressed by the PELS framework. They are access to land, skills, property rights, market for input and outputs, capital for operating cost and asset, existing strategy, supporting environment. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable members, the mechanisms we suggest to expedite land reform are on pages 16 and 17 of our presentation. We have unique practical experience since the years 1990 and since then being involved with land reform and trying our utmost to expedite land reform in partnership with government. Enabling mechanisms is legislation regarding expropriation, legislation regarding subdivisions and a land redistribution bill that elevates the principles of the NDP. Then the other mechanisms proposed are inter alia. The institution of a land reform coordination committee consisting of the relevant director generals of the relevant departments and independent experts from the private sector to report directly to the presidency and DPME, Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, and to ensure coordination among the service delivery of state departments and evaluation of the state of land reform on continual basis. Secondly, incentivize commercial farmers to implement and support land reform projects by granting the recognition as envisaged on page 207 of the NDP. Improved BEE status is one possibility. Thirdly, a land reform fund which all members of the public can donate in support of the cause. Tax exemptions in terms of Section 18A of the Income Tax Act may be considered as an incentive. This fund can be managed jointly by Treasury and the commercial banks. Then, rewarding local areas for achieving land reform targets and make such targets parts of the Auditor General's audit of municipalities. Then, consideration of the PELS framework and concept of local land committees to empower and oblige local municipalities to expedite rural land reform. Next one, utilization of grants and subsidies to leverage cheaper finance of prime less 6% for land reform beneficiaries and land reform projects. Invitation of the private sector as co-creators and partners with regard to the consideration and implementation of policy pertaining to land reform. Mr. Chairman, honourable members, we the members of Witzenberg Pels consider the promotion of a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights as one of those duties and responsibilities of our citizenship, referred to in Section 3 of the Constitution. We believe that land reform in the manner discussed in our presentation is indispensable for the creation of such a society that recognizes and heals the injustices of the past and promotes human dignity, equality, and the human rights and freedom of all its citizens. We submit that the effective implementation of the Partners in Agri-Land Solutions framework on a large scale across the country would foster conditions that would enable citizens to gain access to land on an equitable basis. In particular, it would enable black people previously deprived thereof to become landowners, to gain access to the agricultural value chain, to acquire wealth and prosperity, and very important, to create a generational dividend.
Thank you
I
very
thank
much.
you.
The time has elapsed. Members, clarity seeking questions. Honorable Maila, Honorable Shavambo, Honorable Swart, that order. Honorable Mutapo, you follow Honorable Swart.
No, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Pulse, for your presentation. Obviously, what you are presenting seems to be working for you, but just one question or two on the 30,000 hectares that you are talking about. In terms of ownership, I'm not talking about the laborers. In terms of ownership, what are the demographics in terms of ownership? Now, coming to this process itself, what you present as solutions, none of them seems to be talking to the process that we are engaging in. We are talking here changing Section 25 of the Constitution so that it can make it possible for us to expropriate land with or without compensation. Can you just briefly, what is your take on that particular issue? Thanks very much, Chair.
Honorable Shavambo.
Chair, can I ask that they respond to that so that I don't ask the same question and then we'll then come with the subsequent questions?
All right. Can you respond to this question of Honorable
Thank you,
Maila?
Mr. Chairman. First question, the process regarding Section 25 is described in pages 9 and 10 of our presentation. We refer to the nation's commitment to land reform, and we go from the purpose of this whole exercise. The purpose should be to expedite land reform in South Africa. And we say expropriation without compensation in some cases in terms of legislation that Parliament amends, like an Expropriation Act, which can be tested against Section 36, then there might be expropriation without compensation, and especially for housing and spatial purposes and in other cases. We're not going to go into that in detail because we believe other speakers like Dr. Ruth Hall or Professor Hall, Consatu, and so on, but we set out specifically that it's not necessary or advisable to amend Section 25. But if this committee and government amends Section 25(8), for example, our presentation comes down to it that alone, expropriation alone, will not solve the land reform question. And Mr. Ndaba has pointed out the factors what make land reform successful. You need post-transfer support. You need skills. You need access to markets. And that we have practical experience of on government farms that didn't get that failed. And Pell's farms, and that's going to the ownership, it differs. 100% ownership, sometimes it's 51% ownership because there's a partnership with a commercial farmer, but on day one, the black shareholder has got the option to acquire the majority or all the shares. Interestingly enough, on your presentation, the front page is a photo. And that group, we recently transferred land, 240 hectares next to Ceres. The group consisted of ANC members, COPE supporters, and EFF members. They unanimously decided they don't want government who had a right of first refusal to buy that land because of the other failures. They wanted to partner with PELS so that they can create a generational dividend to transfer to their children and make a success. So our presentation comes to that we must partner government, and government must create an enabling environment and inspire people and enable everybody to work together to expedite land reform. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Chair. I wanted to specifically ask a question to Mr. Ndaba. You say they've got 30% of the business. What is the total turnover of the entire business there? And how much dividends do you receive out of the whole business? And who are did you take a loan to buy that 30% or you were given for free? And what becomes your role? Are you represented in any of the governance structures of the business? Are you in the board or are you in the management of the company itself? So your submission, which you're part of, says that it is neither necessary nor advisable to amend Section 25 of the Constitution to implement sustainable land reform. Is that your argument, Mr. Ndaba? That we must not amend the Constitution to allow other black people who do not have access to land to gain access to land? Is that your argument? Is that what you want to leave us with here, that Mr. Ndaba came to make a submission and said that we must not amend the Constitution to allow other black people to gain access to the land? And to you, Mr. Herod, again, is it you, Herod, right? Yes. Did Ruth Hall play any role in Ruth Hall? Did you meet with her in preparing the perspective? Because Professor Ruth Hall, because some of the issues that are here in your presentation seem to appear on what she came to give as presentation here as well. In terms of how it is. So I wanted to check that. And I wanted to explain that 51% of who owns the 51% and how did you invite the other partners into it. Let's start with Mr. Ndaba.
Thank you, Mr. Shivam. Firstly, I want to clarify something. I'm coming from Eastern Cape. And each and every end of the year when I got some leave, I'm going there and help with some project, the farming project. So I'm stating that I'm with you, but we need firstly to give people skills. Are we going to help those people with skills? Because we can't give the people only the land without skill. You have to give him first the skills, and then he can farm. And then secondly, I began as a farm worker 15, 16 years back. And today we are a group of 13 people who owning 30% shares. And we didn't learn, it was for free. Our commercial farmer
Chair, before it goes far, a group of 13 people owning 30% as a group or each?
As a group. And in that amount of land, and then to become next year, on 2019, we'll becoming a major shareholder with 51%. So, as we already stated here,
Sorry, Chair, Mr. Ndaba, who owns the remaining 70% if you own the 30%?
the commercial farm,
The white commercial farm?
yes,
Oh, okay.
yes. So he gave us those shares for free. Yes. So what I'm trying to say is that we are in line with what it is here. We trying to say to expropriate the land without compensation. It have to be. It have to be done, but in a right way. Firstly, we give the people the skills to do that, and then the access to the land, as I taught on my presentation, and the property right, market for inputs and output, capital for operating costs and assets. So if the people have those tools, so we can do that.
Chair, can you just quickly on a follow-up that want to insist on what dividends have you received as the group of 13 vis-a-vis the turnover of the company? Because you might be said that you're owning the company and have never received anything, so that we are able to then detect
Members,
certain
there's
things.
over-concentration on Mr. Ndaba, and I'm not too sure in its relation to the subject matter. And I'm a bit worried, you know, that there's an over-concentration on him.
Okay. All right. To farming with vegetables, it takes 5 years before you can get in full production. So the first year you have to plant. And then for the next 4 years, you are not going to harvest anything. You have to put only the production cost. It is a fruit trees. And then the 5 year, I think the trees will be about 10% in production. And it doesn't mean you already got the money in your pocket. So, as I say, this year, each and every shareholder have received 114,000 in dividend this year. And we are already on the 4.5 year in our project.
Mr. Van Veen, there was a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Shivambu. No, I did not consult with Professor Hall. I've had the opportunity to be present at the colloquium, but our presentation was in on that same day, the same presentation, but maybe as a lawyer, we see the Constitution the same, but we don't want to go into that details. We expect the committee to decide on their own regarding the Constitution. We focus on the positive. We focus on the commitment that all citizens must make to expedite land reform. And that's all in our presentation. Regarding the ownership and the PALS framework, we've consulted very widely with unions, with Lutuli House, with government, with all political parties. And there is a lot of mistrust when people come and they want to do something. But we've refined the framework. There's an option on day one for the black, if a white farmer, like in this case, donates the 30%, there's an option on day one, which means that they get the right on day one to get all the shares, the black people. We said to Minister Nkwinti and Mr. Mantashi and Mr. Zokwana when they visited us, we're not asking, like everybody, for government's money. We want to show you that we can do land reform, and there are a lot of other factors that makes land reform successful, not just money. It's the education and the people and the skills and the good relationships. So the PALS framework is tested. There cannot be a hidden agenda, and we set that out in the pages in our presentation regarding mistrust, unequal relationships, and all that is in a good structural and legal background. And I invite all of you members of this committee to come and visit us in Witzenberg and see for yourself what is happening there and how we can together inspire the nation with a transparent, tested framework. Thank you.
Yeah. Honorable Swart.
Chair, I just want to commend the presentation because it's, as opposed to the previous presentation, it shows hope for the nation. And it shows that there's a willingness to work together across political race lines to find a solution. And it is encouraging here that there will be a majority shareholding of 51% in this company, and that already 114,000 rand has been paid to emerging farmers, which is far more than many of the state land projects. So from my perspective, I just wanted to commend you and thank you for the presentation and encourage you to continue with this model. Yes, we also see the Section 25 and your comments on Section 25. What I would specifically like to ask you about is your reference to the Expropriation Acts. And whilst we appreciate that you indicate that it is not necessary nor advisable to amend Section 25, but you are also focused on expedition of land reform, you refer to the previous Expropriation Acts. Have you had a look at the Expropriation Bill, which was withdrawn, and would you make comments on that, given your practical experience on the ground, when that bill is reintroduced to Parliament? Thank you.
Honorable Swart, why do you ask comments on a bill that is withdrawn, expropriation bill?
They refer to it they refer to the previous acts which aren't inapplicable, Chair,
Yeah,
so maybe
but
that
why-
in that
by
clarity
why-
light. But if you rule me out of order, I understand. It's late in the afternoon.
No, you can, I mean, please reply.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Land reform, as understood, is restitution, the land claims at government, redistribution, which we are focused on, redistribution in the agricultural sector, and tenure reform. Some of our members have donated land for farm worker housing and whatever. Just for the record, we have already implemented 15 successful new PALS projects with black owners without 1 cent of government assistance and with struggling with the enablers like water permits and subdivisions. Our reference to legislation is on a practical level what is needed to expedite land reform. I do not wish to become an expert on the Expropriation Act. All that we say, it's safer if we can have Section 36, the limitation clause, as a protection clause for any new legislation. Thank you.
Honorable Mutapo.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the presentation. Firstly, for your cool-headedness. Thank you so much. And then on page 10 of this document, your presentation, you on paragraph 2.2.6, you made mention of if this committee, after having considered all the presentation, decides based on those to implement the resolution as agreed upon, you say it will infringe or be detrimental to right to equality, right to citizenship, and right of trade, occupation and profession, and right to environment. The right to equality in terms of Section 9 of the Constitution, according to my view and my understanding, is what we are trying to address here. The imbalances, closing the gap between the haves and the have-nots, irrespective of color. So you might be aware that South Africa has been, in terms of World Bank, ne, has been declared the most unequal society in the whole world. So when you say, in terms of 2.2.6, this will be detrimental to that, whereas as this parliament, we are trying to address those imbalances of the past. So may you kindly, on all those sections which you have tabled, to say they will be this process will be detrimental to these sections in terms of Bill of Rights. Your comment on that? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Parliament's motions stated that it must be implemented in a manner that increases agricultural production and improves food security. So we deal with agricultural land and the redistribution of that, and we want to do that in a positive, cooperative way. When we refer to the possible detrimental effect, we say that if you tamper with the Bill of Rights and Section 25, then Section 3 says citizens have certain rights and privileges and benefits, and one of those might be ownership. Section 9.2 includes full and equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms. Now, if ownership is such a freedom, then the state might discriminate against people if the state wants to keep ownership. And we've seen that the state cannot really farm successful. So we prefer, with our practical experience, that we devise a framework like this, where the state cooperates and enables the private sector to do redistribution of land reform. Human dignity. Land is about dignity for some people, and creating a generational dividend to build up that land, to be able to transfer that land and that farming business to your children, and that is what we're trying to achieve. And I hope I answer your question on that. Thank you.
You have answered, Mr. Van Vuren. Are there any other takers? Or follow-up?
But thank you, Chairperson. But the right to, in terms of right to citizenship, in terms of ownership, and the dignity you are talking about, that's the same dignity we want to address in terms of the have-nots, isn't it?
It's not a question, it's a statement. Mr. Honorable Mpumlo.
Yes, thank you, sir. I've read your paper. Unfortunately, I didn't hear all your presentation, but I wonder why you guys come in so late into the picture. You know, I'm sure would have thought otherwise if you started this thing in the early 90s. At the moment, you have got more than 2 million. Somebody talked about 2.9, and I talk about 3 million farm workers that are in the farms, in the 76% of the farms owned by whites. The government cannot build for them. They bleed for other people. The government cannot help them with social development services, health services, educational services. Now, we've got a problem now. Secondly, we've got a problem of people staying in squatter camps, don't have land now. Thirdly, we've got a problem of the question people who are owning land, who are hungry and sell it to foreigners. These are serious problems that are in front of you. Now, you may be a good Samaritans, but you're few. Too little and too late. Now, what we want to do, we think that if you allow, you carry on with what you're doing.
Can you wrap up, Honorable Mpumlo?
Pardon?
Can you wrap up?
Yeah, the wrapping up is, sorry, I am disturbed. Disturb Pambela. We're coming to the question of Section 25. We believe very strongly. Let me say I. believe very strongly that if the state takes the land and do exactly what you're saying, and just say, you guys, we've got a farm, can you carry on to speed up what you're doing? Because if we're going to wait for individual people, to be very good Samaritans, each one by one, we may take another 200 years to restart. Unless it is enforced by law, and that is, if that has happened. That is the position. Thank you.
Chair, whilst you were out, the question here was why did they come late to the picture? And I think it will be a debate for another time.
All right.
I'm misrepresented here.
Okay.
Now, can you ask them to answer?
No, you are,
because I'm
in
sorry.
any case, you are the last speaker. They will
answer.
They will reply as they conclude
Thank you.
the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to answer that, we only 4 years. The PELS initiative, as I've mentioned, has only started in 2014. And it's because of people believing they are doing the right thing. It comes from the heart, and it's because they're believing that they are doing the right thing. Just to answer that gentleman. And irrespective of what's going to happen and what this parliament is going to decide, I think people in the PELS initiative and the farmers and all the agricultural producers that are involved, they are committed to carry on with this initiative. And as they're saying that a long journey starts with one small step. And as we are taking our steps, we're positive that we're going to make strides. We know that the challenge is very huge in this country, but I think with each little step and each little project that we take on and start anew and afresh, that we are making a difference in our country. Thank you for the opportunity, Chair.
Chairman, if I might just conclude, thank you. The government's policy in the Mandela era was land for redistribution and development. We in our area also embraced that policy and implemented several projects, and today they are still running in terms of that. Then the government changed the policy and prioritized land acquisition with the state as owner. We gave the state one farm, and that failed. And then we implemented the PELS projects, which were successful. And that's where we can show you from a practical experience. Now, another government policy is the National Development Plan. And what we suggest, sir, in our mechanisms on the last 2 pages, is that this parliament can expedite land reform by using that mechanisms in every district and getting people to work towards goals, inspire the nation to work together. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Our thanks to you, Wetzenberg, Pals, and honorable members, officials. We thank you as well for the hard work, for the day, lots of energy, adrenaline from time to time. But thank you very much, and have a good evening. We meet again tomorrow at 9 o'clock in this same venue. The banks are here tomorrow. You see, Mr. Kuvada is around. We hope he's not going to have nightmares. He will sleep very well and come back and be early at 9. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.